In 2011, a Tibetan girl accidentally wandered into the lens of a Japanese director. She had no idea that this chance encounter would completely change the course of her life. The 10-year friendship between her, this Japanese director, and an actor has touched countless hearts. It turns out that such pure and beautiful emotions still exist in this world. The girl's name is Cimu. 10 years later, when Cimu and Dongdong finally talked on the phone again, Cimu couldn't hold back her tears. In her eyes, you could see both longing and hesitation. She knew things could never return to the past, but in her heart, Dongdong still held a special place.
很少的，我觉得很厉害，佩服佩服。哦，好想去哦。厉害。
对，以后我们肯定有机会见的。
In 2011, renowned Japanese documentary director Ryo Takeuchi, along with Japanese-Chinese actor Dongdong, traveled to the beautiful Shangri-La. They were planning to film a documentary about the Yangtze River. Just as they entered the scenic area, they encountered a Tibetan girl holding a small lamb, waiting for tourists to take photos with her. This girl was Cimu. At that time, she was not yet 18 years old, with youthful innocence written all over her face. Due to family circumstances, Cimu had dropped out of school in 4th grade. Having never traveled far from home, she appeared somewhat nervous and restrained in front of the camera. She shyly removed her mask, and her pure, clear eyes and beautiful face instantly caught Dongdong's attention. He enthusiastically took a photo with Cimu. At that moment, Cimu had no idea that this accidental meeting would bring tremendous changes to her life. Cimu told Dongdong that she would wait at the entrance of the scenic area from 7 in the morning until 5 in the evening, waiting for tourists to take photos with her for $1 each. However, due to her introverted and shy personality, sometimes she would stand in the cold wind all day without any tourists willing to take photos with her. Kind-hearted Dongdong immediately called over the director and cameraman, and the three of them took turns photographing with Cimu, earning her $3 at once. To express her gratitude, Cimu happily invited them to visit her home. After arriving at Cimu's home, Dongdong was immediately attracted by the unique decorations there. Cimu's house was rustic yet fresh, everywhere filled with rich ethnic charm. Cimu's mother could not speak Mandarin and could only sit aside, smiling as she watched them. Since director Ryo Takeuchi had not yet learned to speak Chinese at that time, Dongdong had to communicate with Cimu throughout the entire visit. That day, Cimu took Dongdong to the temple and let him experience many local customs.
就是拜佛是不能戴帽子的嘛。
Dongdong also answered many of Cimu's questions. They were like people living in two completely separate parallel worlds, yet they were both immensely curious about each other's lives. For Cimu, the outside world was like a distant legend, and these people from the big city were like a window connecting her to the outside world, which made her incredibly excited. When asked if she had any dreams, Cimu smiled with some bewilderment.
现在的梦想是什么？
我没有什么梦想，这我没想过。
When talking about the bustling outside world, the first place Cimu thought of was Shanghai. She asked Dongdong how far Shanghai was from there, and Dongdong told her it was only a 4-hour flight. Cimu then asked how many people could sit in an airplane, and Dongdong told her that the largest planes could seat 400 people at once.
4个小时就能到。
对啊。
不是吧？
真的？
我不相信，飞机里面能坐400个人。那天上是不是有那个飞机的路啊？
When she learned that buildings in Shanghai could be over 100 stories tall, Cimu was so amazed that her mouth fell open.
上海最高的100多，100多。
就是我是说这样一楼一楼的。
对啊。
100多。
对呀。
哇，不可能吧？
真的。
那怎么做出来的？
真的，你怎么不相信呢？真的，我们带你去上海，然后就给你看高楼，然后我们一起坐电梯，怎么样？
我不用。
真的，我没有骗你。
我不用。
Perhaps seeing the longing and yearning in Cimu's eyes, after getting the director's approval, Dongdong decided to take Cimu to Shanghai for an experience. After hearing this proposal, Cimu was immediately excited with her eyes shining, finding it hard to believe. However, when she returned home to discuss it with her family, she was firmly refused. Cimu's uncle had been outside when he was young and knew the outside world was complicated. He worried his niece would encounter bad people and feared she would be dazzled by the glamorous world. Moreover, Cimu had already been arranged by her parents for a marriage, and after turning 18, she would have to marry a Tibetan young man she had never even met. For traditional unmarried Tibetan girls, going out before marriage was inappropriate. After receiving the rejection, Cimu appeared very disappointed. Soon it was the next day, and the film crew had to leave. Her wish seemed to take off with the plane, flying all the way to her dream city, Shanghai. Standing at the door to see them off, Cimu's eyes were red with tears, reluctant to leave for a long time, her eyes filled with sadness and reluctance. Originally, everyone thought the story between her, Director Ryo Takeuchi, and Dongdong would end there. However, surprisingly and delightfully, a month later, things took a turn. It turned out that Cimu's mother could not bear to see her daughter heartbroken and finally managed to convince the uncle. Eventually accompanied by her mother, Cimu boarded the plane to Shanghai with excitement. Dongdong had been waiting at the airport for a long time, and the two greeted each other with excited smiles like old friends. In the bustling station, Cimu and her mother in their ethnic clothing became a beautiful sight. Then Dongdong took Cimu to ride the subway. Seeing the subway for the first time, Cimu could not help but look around excitedly. After coming out of the subway, Dongdong took Cimu to the most bustling area of Shanghai. Finally seeing the legendary 100-story skyscrapers, Cimu could not help but look up in amazement. When taking the sightseeing elevator to the 100-story building, Cimu was so excited that she trembled all over. Dongdong asked her to close her eyes, then carefully led her to the window.
不可能吧？太漂亮了！
Seeing the scene before her, Cimu was so excited she became speechless. After the elevator ride, the two went to Shanghai's Bund. Watching Cimu's excited expression, Dongdong was deeply moved. He could not help but remember his own feelings when he first went to Japan, from his rural birthplace, which were exactly the same as Cimu's reaction at that moment. The Shanghai trip ended in a flash. 3 months after returning to Shangri-La, the film crew received a letter from Cimu. In the letter, she expressed her gratitude to director Ryo Takeuchi, Dongdong, and the cameraman one by one. She said this Shanghai trip was the most beautiful memory of her life. Cimu also said that as a child she had always dreamed of going to a big city to attend university and then becoming a musician. However, that dream had failed, but now she had a new dream, to open her own small inn in her hometown. 10 years passed in a flash. To film a new documentary, director Ryo Takeuchi came to Shangri-La again without advance notice. Relying on his memory from 10 years ago, he found the village where Cimu had once lived. However, Cimu's house from back then had disappeared. Following the direction pointed by a little girl, the director was instantly stunned. It turned out her family now ran a hotel. Recalling the dream Cimu had mentioned in her letter years ago, the director found it hard to believe. What's even more touching is that Cimu's hotel is named after the string of English letters she saw during her first visit to Shanghai. Upon entering, the director immediately felt that this hotel must be Cimu's former home that he had visited before, but he couldn't believe his eyes because the changes were so dramatic. The entire hotel was beautifully renovated while preserving its previous classical style, appearing very clean and rich in culture and aesthetic appeal. Although they hadn't seen each other for 10 years, Cimu immediately recognized the director and cinematographer the moment they walked through the door. She looked much more mature, yet still beautiful and radiant. Cimu excitedly embraced the director. Due to the pandemic, actor Dongdong was unable to come along. After brief pleasantries, Cimu enthusiastically introduced her hotel to the director.
11月底开业的时候也疫情比较严重嘛，就没什么客人。然后就是刚好过年的时候，那段时间就比较好一些，就游客就比较多。然后又是一直又是疫情，然后就五一这段时间就比较好，就稍微好一些了。来，这边请。
他变了。
来这边请。
谁说说话真的变了？
说话变了，
真的吗？
真的，以前不敢说话，现在说话真的。
老板，带我上。
来这边请。
走，你先走。
哎呀，太感动了，快哭了。
This hotel had just opened last year. After the Shanghai trip, Cimu had the idea of opening an inn. Over the following 10 years, she worked at several guest houses, learning various methods of running accommodations. Until last year, she finally made up her mind, and after borrowing enough money from relatives and banks, her hotel finally opened. When learning that all the decorations in the rooms were personally designed by Cimu, the director found it incredible. Cimu also told the director that it was through that Shanghai trip 10 years ago that she learned rooms could have private bathrooms and heating. Clever as she was, she applied all these ideas to her own hotel. While preserving local ethnic characteristics, she incorporated many modern urban styles, making her hotel very popular in Shangri-La. Seeing that shy little girl from years ago had now grown into a capable and mature business owner, both the director and cameraman could not help but feel deeply moved. At this moment, her mother downstairs heard the commotion and hurriedly came upstairs excitedly to greet them. Unexpectedly, before she could speak, her mother immediately burst into tears of excitement. Hearing this, both the director and cameraman could not help but have tears in their eyes. This friendship, spanning 10 full years, had left deep and beautiful marks in each of their hearts. When Cimu once again held up a small lamb to the camera like she did at 17, the director suddenly felt a bit dazed. 10 years had changed so much.
对，他就说他永远都忘不了那个，就特别感谢你们这样子。他就说他是一生中就是过过最舒服的日子，就是跟你们一起去上海的时候，他就是做梦都没想到可以跟你们一起去上海嘛，就我们一下子都没有想过。
彼女たちにとって一生で一番の思い出。
Today's Shangri-La has also undergone tremendous changes. With the development of tourism, people can now not only make money through photography, but also rent Tibetan costumes and provide horseback riding cultural experiences. The uncle, who had strongly opposed Cimu going to Shanghai back then, has now become a tourism supervisor. When mentioning the past, the uncle smiled brightly and jokingly said that never mind Shanghai. Now even if Cimu wanted to go abroad, he would welcome it.
当时记得吗？你反对他去上海。
对，是的。
啊，今天2个犯人。
现在不反对了，这法官你们带过去了。
特别正常。对，
现在的话，我们几个
我们也突然来的人，对啊，不知道是坏人，对吧？也许我们坏人的话有问题。
别说了，现在是上海，你现在在国外，我也欢迎，是吧？真的，
是国外欢迎，
我真的，你带到国外的我们欢迎。
思想完全变了。
所以电话是特别短的，是吧？
To entertain her honored guests, Cimu brought out the most ceremonial food from her home. During the meal, the cameraman Yang Lin told Cimu that he had actually had concerns about taking her to Shanghai back then, because he was afraid Cimu would be dazzled by the glamorous world and lose her original pure and simple heart and would no longer want to stay in her small hometown. However, the reality was quite the opposite. After seeing the prosperity of the big city, Cimu not only loved her hometown more, but also had the idea of building her hometown to be as good as the big city.
喜不喜欢香格里拉？
喜欢呀，
喜欢。
对，
喜欢在。
每个人都很喜欢自己的家乡。
Today's Cimu is very satisfied with her life. She has not only realized her dreams, but also has 2 lovely sons. The year after parting with the director, she followed her family's arrangements and married the Tibetan young man she had never met. Since her husband works away from home year-round, everything at home is managed by Cimu alone. Strong and beautiful Cimu has no complaints about this, but when mentioning her sister, a trace of envy still shows in her eyes.
你跟老公
父母决定的呀。
啊？
父母。
父母
嗯。
决定了。
对对。
哦。怎么决定的？
就是父母打听的那种嘛。
嗯。
就是说那边好像有个小伙子，就给你找过来这样子。
就定了。
嗯。
所以你结婚之前没见过吗？
没见过。
没见过。
嗯。
那如果长得丑的话怎么办？
啊。哎，这个就看吧。
看吧。哦。那你妹妹呢？妹妹也要，就是不能自己决定。
她可以啊，现在不是已经10年后了吗？
哦。
我们10年前跟那个，哎。
妹妹可以随便谈恋爱。
对。
不行。
我不是不行，我17岁，我什么都不知道。
哦，就已经决定了。被安排好了。
对。
Although only 10 years have passed, her sister has lived a completely different life from hers. Her sister not only went to university, but also will never have an arranged marriage by her parents. When hearing her younger daughter say she does not want to marry even at 30, the mother beside her not only did not object, but smiled and expressed respect for her decision. At the end of the story, Cimu once again put on her favorite ethnic clothing and brought the director to the place where they first met 10 years ago. Looking at the scene before them, both could not help but feel deeply moved. Here, all they could think of was brother Dongdong. Perhaps seeing Cimu's thoughts, the director immediately took out his phone and made a video call to Dongdong, who was far away in Japan. Cimu immediately lowered her head with evasive eyes, but the call was not answered in the end. Beautiful scenes from 10 years ago flashed through her mind one by one, and Cimu suddenly turned away sadly, tears streaming down her face. No one knows that in the age when a young girl's heart first awakens to love because of a stranger's entry, what beautiful stirring she had in her heart. However, such admiration and affection could only be deeply buried in the girl's memory. Perhaps seeing the regret deep in Cimu's heart before leaving, the director finally made the call to Dongdong. Before they could speak, both were so excited they became somewhat speechless. The moment she saw Dongdong, Cimu could not help but burst into tears once again.
Hello, 你记得我吗？对啊，昨天。
To later, Cimu not only got her wish to meet Dongdong, but also attended the reunion with the Yangtze River film premiere, hosted by director Takeuchi Ryo in Japan. She also took the opportunity to investigate Japanese hotels, and just like when she first went to Shanghai, she was amazed to discover that Japanese hotel facilities were extremely comprehensive. Every room had a bathtub and smart toilets, and the outdoor hot springs also greatly interested her. Her trip to Japan was incredibly rewarding. 10 years is neither long nor short. It is enough time for someone to grow from a naive, shy girl holding a lamb waiting for photos into a mature, capable, and decisive hotel owner. What is most touching about Cimu is that whether 10 years ago or 10 years later, whether or not she had seen the vast outside world, she has always held true to her original heart. The most primitive sincerity and kindness in her, her clarity and freedom, appear so precious and rare in today's society.